afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending. Thank you for prioritising this bright blue event over what on earth is going on next door, and everybody's queuing up around the landing for. So you've made absolutely the right choice. This is a bright blue event in partnership with the Chartered Management Institute. Bright Blue, as many of you will know, is an independent think tank and pressure group for liberal conservatism. I'm Diane Banks, I'm a non-exec director of Bright Blue, and very pleased to be with the Chartered Management Institute today to discuss levelling up managerial skills in the UK. We'd love it if you tweeted about this event, and you can use our handle, which is We Are Bright Blue, and the CMI's handle, which is CMI_managers. If you're listening, watching online, you can send in questions via Slido, and those will be texted to me, and I'll do my best to fit them in. Okay, so I'm going to start by introducing our fantastic panel today. So to my right we have David Simmonds MP, and David is chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Migration, as well as the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Housing and Planning and Social Workers, and he was previously a member of the Education Select Committee. And to my left we have Justine Greening. Justine was the Secretary of State for Education 2016 to 2018. She's also served as Secretary of State for Transport and as Secretary of State for International Development at various times. And more to the point, today she is chair of the Purpose Coalition and the Social Mobility Pledge. And okay, so we have Mohan. Marie is the Chief Executive of Common Purpose UK. And to the far left we have Jo Mays. Jo's UK politics reporter for Bloomberg. Anthony Painter, on my far right, is Director of Policy and External Affairs at the Chartered Management Institute. Christopher Millward, who was due to join us today, unfortunately isn't able to, but I'm sure that nevertheless we will have a fantastically productive discussion. Okay, so we always set our panel's homework, and we give them a set of questions that we ask them to answer, and then we ask them to prepare 5 minutes around those themes. So I'll just give you a sense of what it was we'd asked them to look at, and that was, do UK businesses have the managerial skills to navigate the current climate of inflation, a tight labour market, and the tradition to hybrid working? We asked them to look at education and training. We asked them to look at access to training. What role can better management play in starting and scaling up businesses? Public policies, such as the lifelong loan entitlement. What can we learn from other countries? And what can be done to prevent a brain drain of potential managerial talent from so-called left behind areas? Right, so 5 minutes from each of the panellists, and we're going to start with David.
I think I'm going to stand up. I'm very conscious in this room today that there are lots of people who have a lot more experience in the context of this question than I do. I see my former Hillingdon Council colleague, Councillor Philip Cawthorne, who's come from both senior management background and specific professional experience in HR in one of the UK's big blue chip companies, from whom I certainly learnt a lot about approaches to managing organisations effectively during my time in local government. But I think an important point to start with, and especially so from the perspective of government and politics, is what is the purpose of management? You know, why is it important to us at all? And I think in all my time, particularly in local government, the key thing that good management did was it enabled the organisation to deploy its resources efficiently to its intended purpose. And if we looked across all sorts of different services that you provide to the public, you can see the benefit that effective management brings. Because you know, if you look at well-managed local authorities, well-managed police forces, well-managed NHS institutions, the way that they spend money and the outcomes that they achieve with those resources for the public that they serve is greater than in those places that are poorly managed. And we know, if we look across the private sector, although it is perhaps a bit less transparent about how efficiently it uses its resources in the same way, that you can tell where there are well-managed businesses, well-managed organisations versus those that are less so. And of course, we all have experience of that in our lives as customers and as consumers in the way that we interact with the organisations that we come across in the marketplace. And that then leads into the question from the perspective of UK PLC. What should government be doing to improve the quality of the management of all the different things that we do in this country so that those resources are being deployed efficiently? And what does that then mean both in terms of parliamentary scrutiny? What should backbenchers like me be asking of government to ensure that that is done more effectively? But also, what is the role that government and parliament plays in shaping that market? Is it something which can simply be the subject of laissez-faire? Can we assume that the market will deliver a sufficiently high standard of managerial capability? Or does it require active interventions? And of course, what we see if we look at this, going back perhaps in recent years, in the approach that government takes, a series of structural reforms in the way that public services are delivered, many of which are based on seeking to spread a limited capacity, a limited element of managerial resource across a wider range of institutions. So probably a good example is education. You've seen the creation of multi-academy trusts, a sense that there are some head teachers, there are some school leaders who can really efficiently manage a school to achieve the highest possible standards for the population of children that they serve, but that is not something which is available in sufficient numbers that every school can have a leader like that on site, and therefore a view that what you need to do is bring schools together so that groups of them can benefit from the expertise of those managers. If you look across the NHS, we see the creation of both more professional colleges coming forward so that the managerial skills exhibited by the best NHS leaders can be disseminated, but also the reorganisation of NHS institutions so that an organisation which really depends a lot of the time on good management to achieve good patient outcomes can use those relatively scarce managerial resources better. And even in places where we don't really talk about management, we tend to talk about it as leadership, but in places like the Ministry of Defence, in our armed services, we see increasingly a focus on how the best professional soldiers, the best professional sailors, can share their experience that they've gained, often practically commanding ships, leading forces, sometimes leading forces in battle, and then deploy those resources to the wider benefit and effectiveness of those public services. And where it seems to me there remains a challenge, and this is where I think organisations like the CMI and events like this at Bright Blue can help to bridge that gap, is in the understanding of how those learning processes work best. Because we know that people tend to operate in professional silos. So we see people in local government do not have much interaction with people in central government in the civil service, even though they often do quite similar jobs. We don't see the cross-applicability of lessons that you might learn from parts of the private sector to parts of the public sector to the same extent. And whilst through the process, for example, of contracting, when government wants a project delivered through the private sector, you can bring some of those benefits to bear. It's clear that the UK could operate much more effectively through a much more structured alignment of what we mean by good management. So I think what I'm hoping for today is not so much answers to the questions about should you have a lifelong loan entitlement to help you develop your managerial skills, because it's clear to me that good management means enormously different things in different types of contexts, but a sense of how government, recognising that across so many different areas of our economy, we are facing a shortage of appropriately qualified, appropriately skilled workers, and that at a time when the growth agenda for us is absolutely critical, that is holding us back. And I hear this time and time again from constituents across every conceivable business sector. The biggest problem is we cannot get the people that would enable our business to grow. What it is that we can do in terms of effective policy interventions and cross-pollination across sectors so that we can use that managerial capability, which the UK often exhibits as a world leader in some sectors like financial services and professional services, and deploy that effectively to the benefit of our wider economy. So I hope that's a helpful start from a parliamentary perspective.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think that's very important in highlighting issue of managerial skills in the public sector as well as the private sector. So I think when people tend to talk about managerial skills, we tend to talk about big corporations, and of course they do apply in any kind of institution whatsoever. Okay, Justine.
Well, thanks for inviting me here today. I'll give a different take again to David's in a sense to broaden out the discussion. Many of you will know a lot of the work I'm doing now is around social mobility, and it is really working with companies, but also public sector organisations to max out their social mobility footprint. I'm saying, look, you've all got planets sorted with your sustainability plans. Now you need to work on people and levelling up. But what's been really interesting over the course of that, and the reason I brought a lot of them together in this group that we called the Purpose Coalition, is because it struck me that they were really different kinds of leaders than perhaps the traditional ones we might have seen. And in a sense, it gets to the heart of, I think, one of the really interesting aspects of this century we're in, which is all about knowledge and human capital. It's all about talent. And in a sense, the managerial skills you'll need to really succeed in the 21st century are, I think, going to be very different to the skills that you needed in the last century and before. So in the last century, and I speak as an accountant, so maybe I'm very focused on transactions and finance, but in the last century, leadership and management was really about bringing in the numbers. Maybe it was more transactional, maybe it was a different world where there wasn't a skills gap. So actually, you had your pick of talent, and there were these companies called blue chip companies, and if you were lucky, you might get the chance to go and work for one of them, and that would be fantastic for me in my career, because they were blue chip, so I wanted to work for them. It's all changed now. Now, I get to choose who I want to work for if I'm a talented person in the UK economy, and that really is totally changing what good management looks like and turning it on its head. So we're moving from a world where transactional leadership and management was fine and almost was the norm. Like, you had to be quite hard-nosed, you had to tell people what they needed to damn well get on and do. Now it's different. If you lead like that, people just leave. Actually, so what is needed is a very different kind of leadership, which is much more transformational. And it has to reflect the values of a much broader society. And like it or not, certainly business is becoming a lot more like politics, because you can't just contract out of what's happening in the rest of society. And I think that penny really dropped with a lot of businesses during COVID. They had to work out what they were going to do to respond to it, because it was just affecting all of us, including their staff. But I think it also taps into the fact that if you want to be the kind of organisation that is in tune with what this century is all about, it's transformational leadership that is required, which is a much broader skill set. I think in some respects it's a lot harder, because it's maybe not that easy to teach people who maybe think a bit more like a transactional leader how to have that broader confidence in a way, to be a bit more emotionally in tune with a very different world. So I think leadership is changing. I think the kinds of people you're leading and managing is changing. I think staff are very values-based, and in this war for talent, where arguably talent has won, they are looking to be led in a different way, and their expectations of what management looks like is very, very different. They don't want to be treated like they're some little widget that gets tasked to do the next thing. They want to be able to contribute their ideas, and they want to be in organisations they think, first of all, has some purpose. And it'll be really good to hear from Marie about, all of the work you're doing. But also, they want to feel like they are directly contributing, and a lot of that day-to-day sense of whether that's happening comes down to your team and how it's managed and your experience being at work. So then finally, I think there's a what, which then comes in. We talked a little bit about COVID, and there's no doubt that the what of working is just really different. How you manage successfully, A, in this new world that's more values-based, and B, in a world where it's post-COVID and people are remote, and you can't quite have those conversations. I've realised a lot of how I managed and motivated and ran teams revolved around me being there with them, and I could do all of that stuff and communicate, and actually me doing that remotely is meaning I have to change my style. But then the final point I want to make is people want to keep developing, so being a great manager is going to mean you do need to understand what those development gaps are and desires are of people in your team, and whether it's lifelong learning, whether it's micro-credentials, whether it's them maybe being able to take time out and literally go back into education for time. Understanding not just how to run a team, but how to develop a team becomes much, much, much more important. And I'll leave you with one thought on productivity, one final thought. The reason when I was Secretary of State for Education we did opportunity areas was it struck me that no one's really going to care as much about improving schools in Rotherham as people who live in Rotherham, where I grew up. And so you can do the National Teacher Service and try and get people to move around the country, but actually fundamentally what we probably needed to do was work with teachers in Rotherham to be the best versions of themselves and to really be able to max out and succeed in their roles. And so if you're in a country where actually we do have a talent shortage, the terms of trade have utterly changed, actually not just asking yourself, how do I find the talent, but how do I develop the talent I've already got, is probably one of the most important things that most leaders need to be asking themselves right now. And it comes back to my first point. All of my work is about asking companies to and organisations to be engines of social mobility where people can get in and get on in their lives. And that really revolves back round to great management. You won't be able to deliver your bit of a levelled up Britain as an organisation if you don't have that kind of management style and skill that allows really different sorts of talent to be able to thrive and succeed. And that is the name of the game, I think, for success in the 21st century. But if we can do it, we win as a country. So everything hinges on this.
Yeah. Do you draw a distinction between management and leading?
No, because I think everyone's a leader. Everybody leads by example. And I think the earlier you can help people realise that they can be a manager, leader, whatever you want to call it in their roles, then the more they can learn how to do that successfully. And the first time I became a team leader, I remembered I promised myself I'd try and be the boss I'd always wanted but never had. And that's what I've always said to people to try and do.
Good way of looking at it. Okay, Marie.
Thank you very much. Building on a lot of what Justine's just said, actually, for those of you who don't know Common Purpose, we are a global leadership development organisation that started out in the UK, in Newcastle, over 30 years ago. We specialise in cross-boundary leadership, helping leaders to cross all sorts of boundaries, whether it's geography, generations, sector, specialism, etc. And we work with leaders from young adults right through to senior leaders with a global perspective. I think it was interesting, Diane, the question you just asked actually about the difference between a manager and a leader. I think in a way it's an unhelpful distinction, as Justine said, actually. I mean, the thing about manager, you sort of used to think about it was the person who looked behind at what had happened, and the leader was the person who looked forward, the visionary. But in a way, all managers have to be leaders now. We can't have that distinction. And I think, we have leaders everywhere. Young people right through to sort of people at the end of their careers as well. I think there's no doubt we're living in a world of huge uncertainty, huge challenge, quite a lot of fragmentation as well. And because of that, we're asking even more of our leaders and our managers. They've got to provide that compass to guide their teams. They've got to be able to provide some certainty. They've got to be able to help those teams navigate ambiguity as well. And that's even more challenging. I think as well, when we look at the world around us, we've got so many more complex problems, those sort of so-called wicked problems as well. Simple problems, we can sort them out ourselves. We can do them. The harder things we can get help with. The complicated, it takes a little bit more energy. But when it comes to complex problems, when resources are tight, when you've got competing priorities, when you really sort of have to work very hard to bring teams on board, that's the sort of thing that we actually need our leaders to be able to focus on, and need our leaders to be able to help others to navigate as well. And they're the really challenging things. There was a question in the original sort of brief, actually, around whether the UK has the right management skills, and whether we actually have the organisations who can provide them. And I think there's no doubt, there's an absolute wealth of organisations out there, you know, whether it's commercial organisations, whether it's universities and colleges, whether it's in-house themselves, providing management skills. And all of them would say they're listening to employers, there's no doubt about that. And employers, I think one good thing actually at the moment is employers are saying, even now in hard times, they want to continue to invest in their staff. And they want to do it because they know they have to do it if they're going to both retain the talent they've got and attract new talent. So I think that's a positive thing. But I'd suggest that we've got to move well beyond those core, so in a way, Justine, what you said, the old-fashioned management skills. We've got to think differently about what management and leadership is all about. And there's a quote, and I keep coming back to it all the time. It's Alvin Toffler, the futurist, and he said this about sort of 40 years ago or so. And he said, the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who cannot read and write. There'll be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's tough. And it's really tough for those of us who are a little bit older as well, actually. And just to quote another person, Bill Clinton, once he'd ceased to be the president of the US, said that actually every day he said to himself, he was going to say, I'm wrong, or I don't know that. And he said, he deliberately said he's going to say it, and he's going to say it in public as well, because he didn't want to be out of touch with a new and changing world. And I think actually it's maybe something that all of us together should consider. How often do we actually ask ourselves that question? How often do we say, I was wrong? You know, and there's something about that learning culture, that learning environment that is really, really important. But I think since COVID, we've noticed employers saying some new things to us about leadership. And I think there are probably things that many of you in the room will actually sort of nod in recognition of. Justine, your organisation, all about purpose. People are absolutely saying purpose is important. That piece about understanding one's own personal purpose, but also the organisational purpose. And then the wonderful thing when the two coincide, because the two don't coincide, there's something very wrong. So purpose is increasingly important. And I think it gives people the resilience to actually navigate tough times. The other thing is kindness. Before COVID, we rarely heard the words kindness and leadership actually mentioned. Now people are understanding the importance of kindness. We've had that insight into other people's lived experience. We know we're more tolerant. I think we're asking more questions. We're actually more sympathetic to things like mental health, etc. in the workplace. So I think kindness is really increasingly important. The other thing is connections. That whole piece about actually, you talked again, Justine, about this, and I think you did as well, David, about the fact that actually it's not enough to know your own organisation well. It's not enough to know your own sector well. You've got to learn from other sorts of organisations as well. You can't do that without building connections, without building relationships. So I think that's increasingly important too. And it gives that, it's a breeding ground for innovation and the breeding ground actually for collaboration as well. And then finally, the tough conversations. That's really sort of something that's come home to us all. That some of those tough conversations about things which are happening in the world around us can no longer be left at the office door. We're actually having to bring them in. So conversations about what's our organisation doing about climate? What are our organisation doing about inclusion? How are our organisation addressing generational inequalities? All of those things, we as leaders and managers are having to have tougher conversations in the workplace and hopefully developing a more inclusive workplace as a consequence. I just want to say one final thing, actually, I think, which is about this thing about halting the brain drain. And interestingly, Justine was just chairing a session immediately before this on just that topic. But I didn't hear this one thing that was maybe said just after I left. There's something about fostering a sense of belonging. And that's about a sense of belonging to the organisation you're working for and a sense of belonging to the place that you actually live in as well. And I think, you know, for organisations, it's all about that, those things around kindness, those things around connectivity, the things around purpose. And I think it's also about leaders managing to set and articulate the company culture so that everyone understands their place in that organisation and everybody understands actually their role in its success. And I think, again, Jen said, are really making some huge demands of us at the moment because they're just not content to come to work in any old organisation. Some organisations, the blue chips that were talked about earlier, are realising that actually you may have a great company, but some people don't want to work for you anymore. You know, they're not seeing the alignment of purpose, personal and organisational. They're not seeing things like the development opportunities. And I think Jen said, coming into the workplace, are saying, right from get-go, what's my progression plan and what are you doing to develop me? And if they're not seeing it fast enough, they're walking, because actually they're the ones doing the interviewing now as well. So I think that's a major change for us. So I think the organisations that are going to succeed are the ones that actually have those conversations, as Jen said. But I think the other thing is belonging to place, because sometimes your organisation might be too small. You need that sense of actually belonging to a place. And one of the things we're doing at the moment, we're running legacy programs for 18 to 25-year-olds right across the UK. And part of that is giving those young people voice and agency, but it's also connecting them to their peers and connecting them to established leaders and giving them that sense of actually, you know, of belonging, of actually how you make change happen. And critically, I think the other thing about that as well, it's giving established leaders an opportunity to listen to young people, because quite often they don't have it. I was talking to somebody the other day and he was like, I never listen to young people. I never have the opportunity. I'm far too busy. But when I do, it makes me reevaluate everything I'm doing in the organisation. So I think there's something about that two-way conversation. I could go on, Diane, but I'm going to stop.
I mean, you're right in terms of there are so many different ways of working these days. So young people, they don't have to, I mean, as Justine said, they don't have to go and work for a large organisation. They can be self-employed as a gig economy, etc. So they have to have a reason to work there, and they have to have a reason to feel that they belong. We're very pleased that Christopher's able to join us after all. So Christopher Millward is Professor of Practice in Education Policy at the University of Birmingham. So I imagine you haven't had a particularly long journey over here.
No, but I did have to get through the security checks.
Right.
So yeah, thanks for inviting me, and I'm glad I'm here already. So I work on education systems, so I thought I'd reflect a bit on the extent to which our education system in England is equipping people with the knowledge and skills to be the leaders and managers that we need in our business and public services. And if you think about what that might be, well, I think we're interested in people who have the broad cognitive abilities to oversee a range of activity and to adapt, whilst also understanding enough about the specific technical issues in their own sectors. We want them to be drawn from all sections of society, so they understand the range of perspectives and experiences, the people they're serving and the people they're employing. We want them to learn and improve throughout their lives and careers, to step in and out of education and the workplace, develop new skills and attributes as they change jobs and the world changes around them. We want them to be able to work at multiple levels, you know, locally in places like this, nationally and internationally, understand the context for their business, rather than assuming that all settings and all people are the same. And we want them to be stretched by employers who can really capitalise on their capabilities to innovate and to grow, and to do that in different parts of the country, so we spread the benefits of that. That's easy to say. The question, I think, is to what extent is our education system equipping people to be able to do that? And I think there are some challenges, because I think the system throws us into a race, a deep, narrow race for qualifications with a strong focus on young people and then out into the labour market. And so we need to think about how we could address some of that. I think the system's too specialised, so learners focus early on a small number of subjects rather than the broader coverage you see in some other countries. We divide learners still between academic and vocational routes, and that obviously then often tracks social background as well, because of the link between social background and school grades. That means our system's quite stratified, so the choice of pathways is determined early, and that then flows through on what jobs you end up doing in the labour market. It's very focused on young people, it's very time-bound, not enough focus on lifelong learning, and it could be argued it's too centralised as well. So there's a kind of single view of what's good, rather than thinking about what's good for different people in different communities with different backgrounds across the country. The other big thing for me is we can't just throw qualifications into the labour market and assume there's the absorptive capacity for them to be used well. We need to think about the demand side, you know, how we deploy the skills and knowledge of people, not just the supply side. So I'm interested in how we could broaden the curriculum, how we could broaden the pathways, come back to some of the discussions we've had about bringing HE and FE together and academic and vocational routes together, look at tertiary systems that have Look at the incentives for lifelong learning. Lifelong learning entitlement is a great start if we can deliver on it and if it's simple enough really to drive demand. And think about how we have a more joined up approach to skills and other areas of policy. So we're thinking about what are the big national challenges. Is it advanced healthcare? Is it net zero? Is it AI and digital? And how we can bring industrial strategy together with skills training so it's really joining up the supply and the demand side. And I think a place where that will happen is in cities like this. And that means we need to think about devolving more powers to cities like this to bring those things together. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Joe?
Thanks, Dan. Just listening to what Chris said, I want to focus on the brain drain. Because I think if we did everything Chris said there, had an optimal education system across the country producing quality managers, it still has to be the case that those managers want to stay in all the parts of the UK and bring their skill and experience to bear. So I'm going to put it to you that I think there's a symbiotic relationship between levelling up and managerial skills. That's to say, the more an area is levelling up, the more likely it is to attract those managerial skills. And at the same time, by attracting those managerial skills, it's more likely to level up. So I'll talk about those two things. So firstly, levelling up. So if you would like to know how your constituency is doing on levelling up, Bloomberg, I produced a large-scale data project which tracks every constituency in the UK and how they're doing on the levelling up mission, using the government's own metrics for defining levelling up, such as investment in public services, such as quality of transport connections, such as health outcomes. We had 12 metrics that we tracked. So yeah, if you'd like to know how the government's doing in your area, feel free to go to our levelling up tracker and you'll find that information. And the high-level finding at the moment is that the government probably hasn't made as much progress as it would have liked on levelling up since Boris Johnson announced it as the flagship aim in 2019. There are lots of reasons for that. We had the pandemic, we had major distractions. The Prime Minister had a few problems himself. He was rather engaged with dealing with that. But I think it's important we have that accountability tool as the public to ask ourselves, is the government doing what it said on levelling up? So thinking then secondly about managerial skills. So I'll tell you a couple of anecdotes which I think are revealing about how managerial skills come into the levelling up debate. So the first was when I met the head of Stoke County Council, a lady called Abby Brown. And she talked to me about the challenge that they have in levelling up. Now Stoke is identified as one of the flagship areas that the government would like to level up. It's put much money into the area through levelling up funds and so on. So I asked Abby, I said, how's levelling up going? And she said, the answer surprised me, which was that not as well as I would have thought, and that was primarily because of people. She said, we have lots of money, but we don't have the people. So she said she has one transport planner for a city of hundreds of thousands of people. She's like, I cannot build a high-quality, modern transport system for this city if I don't have the planners to do that. So that speaks to me about the issue around managerial skill and levelling up. So the second anecdote I want to tell you is about, I then literally walked down the road and I met the MP for Stoke Central, Jo Gideon, and she made a similar point around bringing skill and talent to Stoke, which was that the government has said it will move more civil service jobs around the country, and Stoke would be one of those areas that would benefit. But there are officials in the civil service who are reticent to do so, frankly because they think that their life prospects and their quality of life would reduce if they left London. So Jo was saying to me, she was saying, we need to have high quality housing in this area, such that top civil servants want to come and live here. Simple things like, do we have a quality, varied offering of food? Right, when you walk down the street, if you go to many towns around the UK, you don't get that. It's many takeaways, it's many, the offering isn't fantastic. So again, that spoke to me that the symbiotic relation between levelling up and managerial skill. If you haven't achieved those things, you're not going to attract the managerial skill. And so my final thought on levelling up is that it is a holistic project. That's to say, it's not solved through money alone. And indeed, if you have high crime in your area, that can be the thing that would deter people from coming. You have fantastic transport connections, there can be job equivalent. People don't feel safe, they don't want to come. So you have to fix lots of issues in an area if you're going to achieve that levelling up goal. My final anecdote is when I met the head of Durham County Council, and she said, we need to make Durham an area that young people want to stay in. I felt very bad when she said that, because I studied at Durham University and then left and came to London because there were better opportunities in London. But she's right, and I guess it's the job of government to deliver that better world in all those areas I talked about, because that will attract the managerial skill, which will cause the levelling up, which will attract more managerial skill.
And Joe, do you get the sense that the new government are going to prioritise levelling up?
So the messaging since Liz Truss became Prime Minister has been a slight step back on levelling up.
Yes.
Boris Johnson at most opportunities would say this is the primary aim of this government. And Simon Clarke is saying he's a levelling up minister, but Liz Truss less so. Yes, I'd say the message has come on slightly.
Yeah, I suppose it's early days, but I would be inclined to agree with that. Okay, and to Anthony.
Good, thank you very much. The advantage of going last is you get the final word. The disadvantage is there may not be very much left for you to say. Certainly in the latter category this afternoon, because we have some incredibly rich thoughts and insights from the panel this afternoon, which thank you. I think, where do I come with it? I've had a few sort of penny drop moments during the course of this conversation already, and there seems to be a fundamental challenge with management and leadership in a UK context, it seems to me. We've heard conversations around the culture that surrounds attitudes towards management, so the cultures of management itself that Marie was talking about, the systemic factors that pull a lot of our educational and skills focus away from concentrating in the sorts of places where management development would benefit from, lifelong learning, for example, a whole life focus, a blend of academic and theory and vocational and technical. If we had a system that did all the things that Chris was describing, actually management leadership would be at the centre of our skills development. There is clearly a crying need, and the conversation we've just had there with Joe about that he's relating from Stoke and Durham. And actually, if you look at the sort of skill strategies that are coming up, they're all identifying the need for leadership and management in order to develop local and regional economies, all of them. So on one side, you can see this sort of the culture and systems that are one way, and there is a need and benefit on the other side, and the two don't quite come together. Now, the benefits are good management and leadership. There's a lot of not good management and leadership. And by the way, just to say a little bit about CMI, we're the chartered professional body for management and leadership. We're not the sort of trade union or professional association of managers or the representative body. We exist and we were set up 75 years ago in order to advance the art and science of management and leadership. And it's really interesting that we've evolved our understanding about what management is in line with lots of the things that have been touched on today already. In fact, had a quick look at our sort of the professional standards page of our website. We have a set of professional standards we apply to qualifications and allow our members and those who learn on courses that are accredited by us to develop their capability. But right at the heart of it was almost the Alvin Toffler quote of learn, unlearn, relearn, almost as a first statement around that. The centre of what we do, it is about ethical leadership that is inclusive, developmental. It's about organisational performance, yes, in terms of the transactional management skills that Justine was talking about, but it's also about interpersonal skills, and it's about self-management, ability to communicate and empathise and so on. So there is quite a modern understanding of what leadership is, and we exist to sort of safeguard and promote that, if you like, and we do that through the qualifications we accredit and standards and so on. But what is quite clear is that there is an enormous benefit from good management and leadership, and government acknowledges this, but it does so in a very quiet way. So I think the three big things that are advantageous for management are growth, opportunity and efficiency. And I'll cover them all off. But my colleagues had a look across all government strategies, at my behest, and apologies if I was wandering in the audience there, Adam, to see the place of management leadership. So we looked at net zero, we looked at plans for growth, the old plan for growth, not necessarily the new one just yet, innovation strategies, place strategies, levelling up, white papers and so on. Management leadership is within all of them. And it's there, and it's covered, and it never quite makes it into the top 5 issues to be addressed in any of them. even though it exists across all of them. It never quite makes it into a sort of policy conversation. It's almost there as a sort of, an analytical point, if you like. But I guess what I would like to see happen is we start to move management and leadership from just analysis of what works into something which is a systematic policy that exists across growth, innovation, education, zero, levelling up, the whole gamut, because we have to shift our performance on this. We are to shift our ability to grow, to thrive, to create opportunity, to generate efficient and innovative public services as a nation. By the way, good management, it is almost one of the most established economic facts that the better quality of management you have, the higher your productivity growth is over time, the more innovative you are. It's a second fact that the best sort of management is inclusive, and it's often inclusive because good managers see organisational benefits from being inclusive and develop the talent that they have at their potential disposal, and that leads to higher productivity, growth and innovation. So good managers generate opportunity for others, and you can see how that can happen in sectors, and it can happen in areas too. Good management is more efficient and innovative. This matters when we're thinking about what is likely to be a very challenging decade or so for public service, another challenging decade or so for public services, particularly health and social care, as we're in an aging society, and that creates demands on the system. How managers are able to plan, to innovate, to collaborate, to cut across services, to coordinate between health and care, for example, is going to be critical for how we can manage the future and maintain our health going forward. So this is fundamental, and it needs a policy agenda that matches the seriousness. I think it was Justine that said at the end of the day, everything hinges on this, and it does. That policy agenda, which I think we're going to have some conversation about in discussion after this, is going to be critical to our national ability to be a successful economy, to be an opportunity society, and to have successful and innovative public services that have great outcomes.
And how does the CMI engage people throughout the UK? I mean, I would imagine that most people who are interested in your qualifications and your offer are based broadly in London and the South East. So do you have a challenge is outreach a challenge?
No, and it's often assumed that's the case. Actually, I did a sort of map of the businesses that use our qualifications, particularly through apprenticeships, by the way. Apprenticeships are really important. We need to come back to that. But they are spread almost exactly. If you were to just randomly distribute our sort of membership and the businesses who use our qualifications across the UK, it would look like the actual map of that. So yes, they are used very heavily in London and the South East, which is where there's a lot of intense economic activity. But it's widespread as well across all sectors, across all sizes of firm and organisation.
Okay, well, it's a very positive note on which to go into the questions and the discussion. Okay, so we've got about 25 minutes. In the centre.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Philip Cawthorne from Hillingdon. Thank you for the bidding, David. I didn't recognise myself in that description, but thank you anyway. I've worked in HR for the past 30-odd years. One of the big opportunities, and it remains as far as I'm concerned, is the untapped potential of older people. We've been hearing all this conference about people in their 50s who first retirement during the pandemic, perhaps thought better of it, given that they're not being quite so well off, and rampant inflation is contributing to that. But it just seems to me that there's a massive untapped potential, but the systems that we have, be they formal or informal, just aren't terribly good at harnessing. So opportunities for people tend to wane in, if you like, as you get older, and I wonder how big an opportunity a panel think that is, and how we go about harnessing that moving forward. I'll pose the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Justine, do you want to start with that?
I think it is a really profound challenge. We know that a lot of people who are above 50 have left the labour market, and if you talk to some recruiters, they'll say they think some of them have just cashed in and are seeing whether they can actually see how life goes. You know, maybe they were working from home during COVID and thought, quite like this. In fact, actually, I quite like just not working really, and I'll just do that now. So there's definitely a thing that has happened, we know that. But what's interesting is I think it ties back to the point I made earlier on value. So if you're going to get those people to come back, it isn't just about paying them more, because they've already decided that wasn't enough. So actually employers are going to have to work a lot harder, whether it's on flexible working, whether it's on that broader pay package, whether it's on that ability to blend what you want to do in the rest of your life with this job. And it was really brought home to me the other day when we got our supermarket delivery turned up, and it was somebody who I used to know as an MP in Putney. Was like, oh, hello, Justine. And I was like, oh, hi, good to see you, didn't expect to see you. And he just stepped out of the market, he didn't know what he was going to do. I wouldn't say he was particularly from a lower socioeconomic background especially, but he just loved the flexibility that doing that role gave him for the moment. But if we're going to get those people back into work, the offer's going to have to be a lot better, I think.
Marie, anything to add to that?
I think I'd add the same thing, actually. You know, I talked about sort of the demands of Gen Z and how organisations have to adapt, and I think it's the same for the people who might be the great returners or else the great stayer-oners. You know, it's about alignment of values, alignment of purpose, you know, with yours and the organisations. And I think we do need to value everybody. I think the challenge is, though, and the challenge for employers is actually how you balance the competing demands of so many generations in the workplace now.
David?
I was just going to make the point. I think we mustn't forget something like 70% of workers in the UK are in an enterprise with less than 5 staff in total. And I think Philip's point is a very powerful one. But how you encourage people back into work, if we're going to do that, given that most people will not be looking at coming into big corporate organisations that have large, well-staffed, experienced HR departments able to manage that. That's where, to me, things like the idea of a lifelong learning entitlement becomes more important, because for most of my constituents who run organisations, they are employing 3 or 4 people, and there isn't the kind of infrastructure that most of us assume is there, because it is there in the corporate world, and that's who lobbies in politics, because they've got the resources to do it.
Thank you. And Anthony, what kind of age ranges are you dealing with at CMI?
It seems like sort of the average learner tends to be around about 40 or so. So it's the whole spectrum. And in fact, one of the criticisms, for example, on the apprenticeship policies, it ends up being older workers. Well, you'd expect that with management. They come to it later on. You come to it later on in your career in the main. But I think that the points made are really important. Actually, we did a report. It was our 75th anniversary. I said we did a thing called the Everyone Economy, which you can download from our website. But it was about actually how you can develop inclusive strategies based on the learning from a whole series of organisations as well. And I do take the point about smaller firms, and this is far more difficult for smaller organisations. But it is simple things like you've got to sort of value it. You've got to tell a story about why it's important. You've got to set the right sort of plans, the right sort of processes in place, and you've got to check yourself that you're doing things in the right way. And beyond that, I think there is a bigger societal and policy conversation to have around this whole area, because we are losing a lot of potential talent, not just workers, but talent that can really contribute to the future of the economy and services.
Any further thoughts?
So, I mean, I would say I'm not convinced people don't want to work. I just don't think they want to work like they used to work, i.e. commuting to London or wherever every day. And in fact, I think people want the people contact. I think people really enjoyed some aspects of getting back to work after the pandemic. So we just got to think about working differently. There's an interesting link with the levelling up conversation, because I think remote working does open up different possibilities. People have said to me, you know, I don't have to go to London. I can work for a company in London while staying in Liverpool or whatever, and we should be thinking about how we capitalise on that into the future.
Anything else? No? Okay, we're going to keep the mic at the back there.
Thank you. Just stick with Anthony's theme of apprenticeships, if I could. Apprentices of today will be managers and leaders of tomorrow. So a question for Anthony and perhaps the members of the panel, a personal question. So I have 2 children. My daughter is 20 and my son is 16. My daughter's just started university in Manchester. In fact, she's just gone into her 2nd year. All is fine. I'm grateful for that, yes. My son is 16. University isn't the right route for my son. An apprenticeship is. We're now in October, and we haven't secured an apprenticeship for him, despite him having understand the system, but we feel quite on our own. And there's a term that I discovered a few months ago, which is the September guarantee. I thought I understood what that meant, but still I'm a bit lost and confused in terms of what that means. So I just wondered whether the panel could perhaps give me some advice about where I might be able to start looking next.
Anthony, do you want to take that when you mentioned apprenticeships?
An apprenticeship relies on having an employer who's willing to offer the job, which means that if there isn't something quite in the sector that you're looking for in the area that you're looking at the right time, it can be difficult. So you know there are the apprenticeship service obviously has the information you provide. There are a lot of local training providers as well. A lot of the apprenticeships are delivered through local training providers. And will be advertised as jobs, and it's worth checking out those as well. So stick at it. We do need to address more fundamentally how we can encourage more employers onto the apprenticeship system. We think, for example, that employers should be automatically registered on the apprenticeship service as soon as they have employees, so they see how the system could operate, as well as providing better advice, support and guidance to apprentices themselves and employers who do not normally hire apprentices as well. So there's lots of system improvements that are necessary as well. So I haven't got a short, quick, easy answer for you, but it sounds like you're on it and you're doing a lot of the right things and hopefully the right opportunity in there to see.
And Christopher, you spoke about education specialising too soon, etc. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think there's no doubt that what you talked about is a challenge, which is it's very easy to apply through UCAS to university. It's just dead straightforward. Applying for apprenticeship is a lot harder, although UCAS is trying to bring more information and support into play for that. And one of the reasons for that is it isn't actually a binary divide between university or apprenticeships. So the apprenticeships can be higher level and degree level apprenticeships. So I think what we've got to work towards is this all being part of a post-compulsory education system. I don't think too many people go to university. I think too many people go young, full-time, full-degree, campus-based, and we need to be getting a more plural set of course offerings which include more work-based opportunities like apprenticeships, which involve colleges and universities, so you're not left with this kind of binary choice at an age where frankly you're too young to be able to do that.
Justine?
I mean, two medium-term things. One could be short-term, just generally. One is reform of the apprentice levy. I mean, you could do that tomorrow. In fact, I'd like to see the Cabinet have a bit of a go on that, frankly. Make that, it's ridiculous that billions is being handed back that could create tens of thousands plus of apprentices for people like your son. That's the first thing. And actually that really is a pro-growth measure that we just have to get on with, actually. The second is T-levels, and I think getting employers to really step forward to provide the work placements that T-levels need, so we can just rapidly roll those out. And so when I was at education, that's when we announced T-levels. And the reason I wanted to go down that route was because people might want to do vocational education, but they don't always know necessarily which sector or which employer they would want to do an apprenticeship in. And also I was very conscious that when we hit this kind of time, when you're in a downturn and there's less levy because there's less economic activity, you almost need a T-level part of the vocational offer to be able to scale up, and it's almost like a vocational stabiliser system, a bit like the welfare system. So I think the sooner you can get that T-level system working, certainly as I intended, especially now we're looking like we're heading into a downturn, the better. But in the meantime, I think maybe the government needs to look at what it can do to incentivise employers, if necessary, to step into it rapidly. And it should be looking at a universal offer on T-levels, so that even if you're in more rural areas, you're not constrained by a lack of T-levels, because there's a lack of employers who can provide the work placements that means you can do T-level. These are really practical issues, but at the heart of them, is a sort of question about whether we can deliver for young people who need that stuff sorted now, not in a few years' time when they're too old.
Either of you like to comment on that?
I don't know enough to comment.
Okay, question here at the front.
Okay, so very
Oh, we
quickly,
just wait for the mic.
So I've got a number of hats here. I'm a CMI Chartered Manager. I've been consulting for a long time, and I'm doing a PhD looking at identity and how that affects outcomes, so I'm really interested in all of this. Question number one, in the workplace, I take Justine's point that leadership management shouldn't be something different, but a lot of managers are just managers, and the leadership element isn't there. But a lot of them have come up from whatever they did before, and because they were good at their job, they got promoted into management, and there's still a lack of understanding that leadership is actually a different skill set. The other point, my husband is an engineer, so once what Chris was speaking about combining education, higher education and vocational, in his industry they have a huge difficulty getting people in to train up, and the perception is people don't want to get their hands dirty anymore. There's a perception that, you know, it's good to go to university, and there's something kind of menial about stripping heavy machinery. And I mean, I come from Wolverhampton, my family was in heavy industry. I don't think there's anything, you know, you wouldn't want a surgeon to fix your boiler or your car. How can we address that perception that there's something less about doing a vocation than going to university?
I'd like to start with your first point. I think you make a really good point that people in all professions, when they're promoted because they're good at whatever the thing is that they do, but that doesn't mean they're going to be a good manager. Anthony, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a city of 1,000 trades. I wonder whether management was one of those trades originally. I'm guessing not. Yeah, and actually it is a skill set. And, you know, increasingly, when we have the conversation around skills, I've been to a lot of gatherings talking about the future of skills, whatever. We're talking about digital skills, we're talking about engineering, we're talking about green skills, and so on. And very rarely is there a conversation about how you weave all these things together in order to make an organisation that could be innovative, productive, and all those things. And that's management. Management pulls all those things together. You know, this is a chartered management. And we don't talk about that bit. And the problem is that's the bit that kind of ultimately is going to make it all work, right? So it's absolutely essential that we think about this as a skill set. By the way, on apprenticeships, and we take a slightly different view on this, linked to this question, because we've been looking for means beyond the qualifications that we provide. We do a lot of partnership work with universities and so on, of really getting it into the bloodstream of the education system, the economy, and so on. Apprenticeships in the past sort of decade or so, standards-based apprenticeships, have been so important. I can see how there's some cause for careful reform of the levy, particularly as Justine was talking about ensuring that any unspent levy funds are utilised and not lost. We have to be slightly careful. So there was a conversation, there was a policy last week, for example, from the opposition. I can say that here because I'm going to criticise it. But the idea is actually 50% of levy funds can just be used for flexible training. The big problem with that is the levy payers, 3% of employees who pay the levy will hoover up half the funds. And actually what it means is you'll cut apprenticeships. Now you've got to be really careful how we reform it. If we get it right, we'll be developing those sorts of horizontal skills to blend together the vertical technical skills that you're talking about.
Anyone else want to comment on either of those points?
Shall I come on the second point?
Yeah, please do.
So, I mean, the issue you've identified is, of course, right, but I think it's not new, and it's not only this country. So you know, you've seen professions like nursing and teaching going more and more parts of areas like engineering becoming part of higher education. And part of that is that vocational is not synonymous with lower. So it's a way of enabling people to do applied work whilst continuing to learn, and as they become managers and leaders, all of them need. So I see, you know, people going into vocational professions, working through FE and HE and having the opportunity to progress, and that's one of the ways to support them through it. Germany has this famous technical education system, but they are increasingly blending what they call technical background groups, because that's what learners want. They want to go on and do a degree, and you can't really constrain that. ambitions drive that throughout the world. So we need to be thinking about how the two come together, and that's a way of getting, you know, the nice mix of cognitive and technical and applied skills.
Joe, any thoughts?
There are experts in these issues as well, but I'm not worried.
Fair enough, Justine.
Oh, I take your point on the levy. I mean, I think you just have to work through them. I think you want to top slice some of it and centrally hold it, and then make sure it goes to parts of the country where there are fewer larger levy-paying employers. Make sure it goes to age groups that we know from the market that the levy is less likely to be invested in, like 16 and 17-year-olds. I think that's just like a decision. It's not complicated. If it's not enough money, then government just has to decide whether it wants to top up. I mean, these are literally just choices to be made, given that we're in a skills crisis, that we kind of need to fix now. Otherwise, yeah, the other simple fix, which I don't think is the right one, is just suck in everyone else's talent and have more immigration. But it feels like a massive missed opportunity to connect people in our country up with the high-skilled roles that we are already producing. And I think also, given that it's a cost of living challenge where people literally can't afford to put food on the table, why wouldn't we want to create a version of Britain where we can break some of those cycles for those people and allow them and their families to start connecting up into work that can give them careers and progression and all of that. I think it's really, really so clear-cut what we need to do now. And that means probably, you know, an emergency budget on skills as a centrepiece of any plan on growth, starting with a reform of apprenticeship levy literally next week. You could launch it next week, but going way, way, way beyond that in my view. Anyway, there you go. Big opportunity, in other words.
Yeah, I think, again, the challenge for me comes back to the fact that most of the economy is based around small and micro businesses. And a lot of these challenges are much easier to address, including things like the apprenticeship levy, when you've got the large infrastructure of an HR department behind you to organise that, look at how to deploy those resources efficiently. And I think Justine is spot on in identifying the priority. But it feels to me that the first step really needs to be about thinking, how do you make this something that works for most of the economy, which is very, very small companies, rather than something that is just easy to access for corporate Britain?
Not on apprenticeships, but on this notion of leadership as well. I do think we need to redefine it. We need to help people have that ambition to recognise themselves as leaders, you know, particularly young people as well, actually, in terms of all the things they can achieve. I think we need leaders throughout organisations, not just at the very top as well, and we need to be encouraging and developing and nurturing that talent as we go through.
Okay, we have time for one more. All right, I'm going to take both of them. Oh no, there's all right. I'm going to take all three. I'm going to ask the panelists to pick out what they want from the three. Okay, so yeah.
Good afternoon, David Jones, just here representing myself as a member. Just listening to the final points there about how to connect small companies. Where the government is invested in categories for digital, for high-value manufacturing, and a range of other activities, is there an opportunity to link in managerial skills with those and direct small companies into those categories to bring in broader capabilities that we mentioned around digital and everything else with managerial skills, use and extend mechanisms already in place.
Okay.
Probably speak to that with Sue Blatchford, just representing myself as a businesswoman. So is it still, we all agree that reskilling and bringing new people into the work, bringing people back into the workplace and getting people in different jobs is incredibly important. Is it still a culture thing? Is there still a culture that people do not want to be retrained? They're scared, certainly people of a certain age, scared about going back into the classroom. Maybe they left the classroom when they were 16. They don't see it as something that's for them. Is there something that the government can be doing just to encourage people that this is the way of the future? You can reinvent yourself every 10 years if you want to, but people are scared to do that.
Okay.
Thank you. It's really interesting from BlackRock. Just to say, I completely agree with many of the things that have been said, including what Justine said. I've been doing some work on Truss Government and put So I think companies like mine actually do have resources that we can put into this. So we like to pay. We wouldn't want to employ anybody on for free. But there's a role, I think, for government to suck in some of that resource and distribute it out. Maybe paying kids to go on T-level work experience placements rather than getting small businesses to go from the rigmarole of payroll, and tax HMRC to do with that. So I think there is a really good role for government in joining up the system and making it work about these opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Right, so small companies, resistance to retraining, T-levels and joining up the system. So I'm going to ask the panel to pick out what they fancy out of all of those and go down, starting with Anthony.
Okay, thank you. So I like the idea of an emergency budget for skills, suggested earlier on. And I think it links to all the questions in different ways, actually. The catapults question, absolutely. I speak to a senior person that made a change of commerce a week or so ago, and he was saying, look, we've got loads of people who've got the technical skills, but companies are really struggling because they haven't actually got the management capability, the business planning, the people skills that you need. So I would have, as part of that emergency budget for skills, a core component which is about leveraging the management leadership capability of the country. I would build on the apprenticeship system there. I would introduce an apprenticeship opportunity fund to help small businesses into the system. I'd automatically enrol them on the apprenticeship service as I suggested. I would try and ensure that tax allowances for investment in high quality skills attracted as much benefit for firms as for investment in machinery and so on. And I would, as part of that emergency budget for skills, I would seek to find mechanisms to develop rather than demonise management in the public sector as well alongside that, when we rely on all of those things. So there's lots of good ideas, lots of system improvements that are needed, which was suggested Anthony. But beyond that, there is a need for a concerted strategy linked to a human capital strategy, to use that economist phrase for the UK.
Marie?
Absolutely yes, in terms of lifelong learning. But I don't think it's the role of government. I think it's the role of employers. I think it's the role of all of us, actually. I don't think government can be mandated just to do that. And I think also it's that piece, actually, Christopher, you talked about earlier on, actually. It's the role of tech at the moment. Because we can be tech-enabled, there's so much more on offer to us. So just because there's only those 3 T-level courses in Boston, now because of sort of blended learning, we can actually offer so much more. You don't have to be in that city in order to actually take advantage of it. And again, go back to your point, Christopher, it's that thing about, this whole thing about, the so-called digital nomads, the people actually who can work anywhere. You don't have to leave where you live in order to get the great job anymore. It may not be perfect, but actually there's a new future opening up to us, and we shouldn't be afraid of actually embracing it.
David?
I think there's a challenge here about how we do government. At the moment, government often feels quite siloed, and I think all 3 questions reflect different aspects of that. And an example for me, except probably Anthony's point best, we know the research shows the earlier in your education career you do work experience, the more likely you are to get and keep a job when you enter the workforce. And yet schools pretty much have stopped doing work experience because their priority now is about your grades in your academic exams, and work experience has become an inconvenience, so they just don't do it anymore. So actually we're stopping ourselves from achieving one of the outcomes that we want to achieve because of the way that we've structured it. So I think there's an opportunity in government to think again about what the outcomes are that we're trying to achieve. And there's lots of stuff in different bits of government. If we look at things like childcare, how that enables parents to access the workplace and access more hours if they want to, caring responsibilities, the aspects around lifelong learning. So I think rather than focusing on what should be the structure of the apprenticeship levy or what should be the structure of government intervention, I think we need to take a step back and say, what is it that we want to achieve in terms of outcomes, greater participation in the workforce, a higher degree of management skills, and how does all the stuff that government does contribute to that, rather than saying which department's going to design a structure within which we try and confine our ambitions in this particular field.
Justine?
Well, a great discussion. 2 points. The culture point really important actually, because it's at the heart of whether or not you'll be able to land lifelong learning effectively, and you know, to draw a different comparison but one that's relevant. You look at Green Deal. Green Deal was about allowing people finance to be able to invest in you know, all sorts of great net zero style things. Didn't work because actually, as I remember having this discussion in government about, we haven't really understood the customer segments we were targeting. You could already borrow money to get solar panels, and we hadn't really got to the heart of, well, why aren't people doing that? It wasn't about the finance, and I think for lifelong learning entitlement, government really needs to get a sense of what it is that is stopping people from that culture of lifelong learning right now. Is it they can't get a loan to invest? Is it that the qualifications they might do, they don't understand them, they don't know if they're portable, they don't know if they're valuable, etc.? Or is it that it's a culture thing? They don't have the confidence. Once you're out of education in Britain, that tends to be it for all of us. The answer to the different segments of society and what is holding them back drives you to the answers on policy as to how you then unlock lifelong learning to be part of a demand for lifelong learning, in a sense. And then it comes back to Anthony's point, which is, at that stage, you can then look at the role of businesses and employers in, so what's their role in addressing those very different kinds of people that might be able to access lifelong learning, but right now, for different reasons, just can't. And, you know, I really welcome the engagement of the BlackRocks of this world on all of this. I think it's crucial, and actually, I think you've done an awful lot as a business to challenge other companies that you are investing in to think differently about what they need to do to contribute. I think they're all on a journey, and I think it's really easy to criticise companies for not doing enough. The bottom line is it now becoming a race to the top for lots of different reasons? Yes, and that I think is really important. And I think back to where, say, Labour was with Corbyn, where business was a problem to be fixed. I think is steadily getting into a much more constructive space. And, you know, speaking as someone who's a member of the Conservative Party, this is what we should all be thinking about. Business is part of the solution on all of these challenges we face, whether it's net zero or levelling up. You know, that's in the slipstream what I think this party is all about, and it's a massive, massive opportunity. And then I want to see David Simmonds in government beating the drum for SMEs all the time, because frankly, you know, you almost need an SME test on every single policy that comes out, because I think you're absolutely right that the danger is it just ends up being a secondary point when actually probably if it doesn't work for SMEs, you probably haven't got a good enough policy.
Hey, Joe.
Just on the retraining point, which I think is critical, and the government is going to have to do more to encourage that. And that's because we are about to enter a phase in the economic cycle where retraining is going to become imperative. And that's because the Bank of England are forecasting interest rates of 5% next year. Now, there are companies that could survive when interest rates are at 0.5. 5% is a whole new world, and we're going to see insolvencies. We're about to go through a kind of creative destruction phase of the cycle, and employees will have to find new jobs, and the government's have to be there to help them.
I was just going to say, I'm very sympathetic to the point about skills and catapults. I think an example of silos is we have a different approach to R&D strategy for skills. And if you think about industrial strategy, skills is the point where you create opportunity as well as growth. That happens in places like this when you have a joint approach. So if we can get those things together, that'd be really, really valuable.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I'm going to end with a quick fire, and I'm going to ask the panel, going right back to the beginning, starting with Anthony, I'm going to ask them what is the one thing that they would prioritise in order to level up managerial skills in the UK? Just one thing, one sentence, Anthony.
Proper local structures to encourage employers, particularly smaller employers, to take part in the things that are available to them through the education and skills systems of management and leadership.
Right, local structures, Marie?
Learn, unlearn and relearn.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to use that. David?
I think Parliament and government being in possession of a much truer picture of what the nature of the economy is, i.e. more aware of SMEs and their proportion compared to corporate Britain.
Yeah, awareness. Yeah, Justine.
Mentoring. Why reinvent the wheel when someone's already... Mentoring and coaching, just access to that would fix a lot of things.
Brilliant, Joe.
Put your shoulder to the wheel and really deliver levelling up.
Yeah.
Bring together the funding and regulation of further and higher education.
Excellent, thank you. All very good points. I'd like to thank the panel. I'd like to thank the CMI for partnering with us today, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here with us. I also need to tell you that you can join Bright Blue for a special rate of £10 during conference only, and for that you get copies of all of our research, our magazines, and you get invited to lots of different events during the year. Okay, thank you very much and have a good rest of conference.